Hi, I'm Creative Dave, coming to you from my home studio to help you learn to think more creatively. This is episode 2 in a series where I look at creative moments in film and television and use them to teach you about creative thinking. This episode is all about, how do I do divergent thinking? Remember the creativity formula I talked about in episode 1? Creativity equals psychological safety plus curiosity plus divergent thinking. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that divergent thinking part. Divergent thinking could have a couple of different definitions. The first one is the ability to make your mind go in many different directions. Second one is the ability to generate many different solutions to a problem. The third one is being able to use tools in different ways or different contexts. And the fourth one would be the ability to build off of other ideas. Now, it's important to remember here that divergent thinking isn't creative thinking in itself. It's just one important step in the creative thinking process. The hardest part of divergent thinking is that you can be held hostage by your own knowledge. Let's think about how our brains work for a second. Our brains use the most oxygen of any organ in our body, and they're always trying to save energy. So, the more knowledgeable we become at something, our brain starts to always go down the path of least resistance. That path of least resistance is what we're trying not to use when we're divergent thinking. Fortunately, you can get better at this with practice. Neuroscientists who study creative thinking call this disinhibition, which is the ability to ignore thoughts that keep you just on one line of thinking. And that's something that has been proven over time that you can get better at with practice. Divergent thinking has 4 main elements: defer judgment, combine and build, seek wild ideas, and go for quantity. So let's turn to our movies and see what that looks like. I used Back to the Future Part 3 back in episode 1, but I want to use it again here. When you're divergent thinking, you want to defer judgment, which means you're not deciding whether an idea is a good idea or a bad idea yet. There'll be time for that later, but right now, you just want ideas.
Wait. I've got it! We can simply roll it down a steep hill. No, we never find a smooth enough surface. Unless, of course, ice. We'll wait until winter, when the lake freezes over.
Winter? Doc, what are you talking about? Monday, it's 3 days away.
You hear that? Doc gave a bunch of ideas, which was great divergent thinking, but he judged them immediately. In a divergent thinking session, you want to put off your judgment until later and just focus on generating ideas.
An hour. Huh? That's it!
The next element of divergent thinking is combine and build. Now, I think it's actually a legal requirement that every creativity specialist talks about this scene in Apollo 13, but here we go.
It just isn't a contingency we've remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we gotta come through. We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this, using nothing but that.
What makes this even better is it was a real-life event. One way to generate more ideas is to combine ideas and build off of ideas. They had to build off of their knowledge of how these filters worked and combine it with the functions of multiple parts to generate new ideas.
Heads up, people, look out now.
What's this?
That's what they gotta make.
Well, I hope you got the procedures for me.
Right here.
That's it?
Now, this is usually done in a brainstorming session, which, let's face it, doesn't make good TV. But if you take 2 ideas, combine them, and then build off of them, that's good divergent thinking. Remember, the goal is to come up with lots of ideas. Let's take a look at another movie, Sahara.
Dirk!
Here we see Dirk and Al stuck in the desert when they come across the wreckage of an airplane that crash landed decades ago.
Well, you don't see that every day.
All right.
I bet you 100. There's a toolkit in there. I don't want to rain on your crazy parade, buddy, but I don't think we can fix this thing.
Combining their knowledge of airplanes and sailboats, they made a land sail to get them out of the desert. Combining and building. The next element of divergent thinking is to seek wild ideas. Your expertise can actually be your worst enemy because once you learn the way things work, it becomes harder to think differently. So one of the strategies that I talk about in my book is the naive expert, where you bring in someone to a brainstorming session who is not an expert on something, and then you use the questions that they ask to help you think differently. This expert might not help you solve the problem, but they'll help you think differently enough to generate some new ideas. In this episode of Psych, Sean and Gus are brought in to help with an expert security force. Quite obviously here, they're not the experts.
Whatever it takes to stimulate the creative process within limits.
Let's take a look at how these interactions work.
With all 6 bodyguards, then we have seemingly eliminated all possibilities of an attack. So what are we missing?
Here comes the wow.
Yes, Mr. Spencer, you have something?
As a matter of fact, I do, Walt. If the assassin is unable to take a shot from above, then I think there is a very, very good possibility that he will shoot from beneath.
From beneath?
Indeed. Shoot from beneath.
So, what are you saying? The killer's like a groundhog who digs little tunnels in the earth, something like that?
What are you calculating, Alan?
Oh, I'm figuring the odds of Mr. Spencer getting fired.
What? One thing I would add to this is, if you do that, make sure everyone knows why the non-expert is there to help you avoid the type of frustration that might come with that. All right, and then we have Apollo 13 again, where they've realized that no matter what they do, they're a few amps short of being able to power up the command module.
3 or 4 amps.
God damn it, John. Is it 3 or 4?
4.
4! 4 more amps. We know they have some power left in the LEM batteries, right?
Yeah.
We have an umbilical that provides power from the command module to the LEM.
Right, it's backup for the LEM power supply.
I'm listening.
So, reverse it. Reverse the flow and see if we can draw these 4 amps from the LEM batteries before we cut it loose. Why can't we do that?
We don't have a procedure for that, do we?
You're gonna lose a lot in the transfer, Ken.
Yeah, but all we're talking about here is 4 amps.
Again, a wild idea using a tool and a procedure in ways that they were never intended to be used.
We're on the computer.
Ken,
Go ahead.
is your computer on now?
Up and running. How do we look?
I think we got it, buddy.
And then finally, we have go for quantity. Now, I don't actually have a movie clip about this one because, let's face it, sitting around and brainstorming doesn't make for good television. But the idea here is that you want lots of ideas. If you're sitting in a brainstorming session with a group of people, there's no reason you can't search for 50 ideas or more. The more ideas you have, the more likely it is you'll come up with good creative solutions. For more ideas on how to implement creative thinking in your school or workplace, check out my book, Creativity Boost. And I love speaking with school groups and community groups and businesses on how you can make creative thinking work for you. So until next time, I'm Creative Dave.